And, of course, there is this thing called the Greater Israel Project, and Mr. Lauder, now the father-in-law of the chairman of the fiat currency, fractional reserve, unconstitutional Federal Reserve, has this to say, of course, about what should be happening.
The Jewish state is facing rockets of disinformation every minute of every day. There is no less a campaign to destroy the country. And it's coming from TikTok. It's coming from mainstream media, from the BBC, from CNN. It's coming from each posting, each headline, each fake photo of a starving child.
Those fake photos of the starving children. You know, they're so fake, right? Well, let's talk about fakery. The Strait and Rubio. Rubio can't even manage to lie well. Here are Ron Paul and Daniel McAdams covering Rubio's appearances before the House. So check this out. I think this is valuable.
This
we'll bring
is not
the volume
a scam.
down.
He was before the Senate talking about Iran, and he unintentionally, I would suggest, drops a couple of zingers. So listen to this first one. He's talking about the U.S. war on Iran. If we can, let's listen to this. Let's listen in here.
Let me first bifurcate two things. The only reason there's a blockade, the only reason why there's a U.S. blockade is because Iran has closed they're firing on commercial ships, and they've mined large segments of Hormuz international waters. And so the blockade is only against Iranian.
Okay, so let's pause it right there. Right off the bat, again, as we did with another piece last night, within 10 seconds, not even 10 seconds in, Rubio lies. Those aren't international waters. Those are Iranian and Omani waters, as we know. He can't seem to do the math, but he can lie very well.
Ships. And it's very simple. The notion is if no one's ships are going to get out, then Iran's ships aren't going to get out either. We can't live in a world in which they get to close the straits and tell everybody, pay us a toll or we'll blow you up, but their ships get to go out unfettered. So again, this coming from the administration that hunted down foreign tankers and shoots people in international waters, now 200 victims in the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific. Do you think anybody in Congress brought that up? Do you think anybody said, hey, Marco, right now, I could call members of the ICJ and ask them to bring you up on charges? Oh, that's right. But the United States doesn't participate with them, even though they helped create the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court. That's right. Let's continue. That's the reason why there's a blockade. There wouldn't have been a blockade if Iran had agreed to do what they said they would do when the ceasefire kicked in, which is they were going to open the straits. So
again, we all know the sequence. The United States had a nuclear agreement. Iran was abiding by it. The United States broke it. Iran stuck with it for another year and a half before they started to enrich their uranium beyond 4%. The United States then claimed that the Iranians were the bad guys, even though for another 7 years, the Iranians were open to international atomic energy inspectors and showing they were only using it for energy, while the United States takes $3.8 billion a year as a recurring item and sends it to Israel, which has nuclear weapons, won't acknowledge them because, of course, if they did, the United States couldn't send them money, and is not open to nuclear inspections. Because that's the kind of hypocrisy you get. He's got a keen alacrity for being able to spout lies, doesn't he?
So let me just focus on the straits for a moment. Number one, what they're doing is unlawful and illegal. There isn't a country on earth
No, it's totally lawful and it's totally legal. He's the one who should be in jail. Let's take a break from this, check out some of your thoughts, and get some thoughts from, of course, a man who has keen alacrity for freedom, for philosophy, for the golden rule. We're going to check in with our Mind Meld guest. He is the man from EricPetersAutos.com, otherwise known as Eric Peters. It's time for the Liberty Conspiracy Mind Meld, and we are going to go to the planet Vulcan for a little while. All right, good stuff, good stuff. Thank you, Spocko and McCoy. And if you ever get a chance to read the stories that are based on the Star Trek cartoon series, as childish as it might seem, Those are some pretty good stories. James Blish, great science fiction writer, adapted those, and they're terrific. Let's bring in our guest. He is the man, Eric Peters of Eric Peters Autos. Live long and prosper, fellow Vulcan. How are you?
I am good, my friend. And I'm just shocked beyond words that the deal has fallen through.
It's Casablanca. I'm shocked, I say. Here are your winnings.
The short-sightedness of Trump is something that bears talking about all by itself. Like, if you're going to be a bloviating, blustering guy like he is and make these outlandish claims, and then literally the very next day, it becomes apparent that everything you said was nonsense, and you were probably just lying through your teeth, you become ridiculous. Trump is now ridiculous. He ironically loves to project strength, like he's some kind of caudillo, he's some kind of jefe, some strong man. The world's laughing at him. The Iranians are laughing at him. Everybody is laughing at him, except for the handful of people who are still enthralled by him for some reason, which I don't begin to understand. The Iranians are confident because they won.
Exactly. Donald Trump completely stepped in it, not understanding that the basic logistics of it. Should have explained it to him, that regardless of the immorality and the unconstitutionality of it, just the idea of sending those people in, anybody, a child could look at that and say, so let me get this straight. You want to try to control that strait on the other side of the planet, and it costs money. You've got to feed people, and that's their home base. Just utterly absurd and ridiculous. And of course, the Iranians are they're sitting pretty now. They are, of course, they've gone through some terrible things, but this realignment that is happening now with Pakistan and Turkey was a very, very questionable political body in that entire, as Jeffrey Pyatt would have said, that entire radical electron when they were talking about Ukraine. Remember, they were putting the government of Ukraine together in 2014. Turkey has always sort of been on the fence because they supply a lot of oil to the Israelis. But at the same time, I think they're starting to recognize that the Israelis have intentions of taking a lot of Turkish land for their Greater Israel project. So it looks like the Turks are starting to see that if they can find some new avenues to get their sales together, maybe they'll be decreasing what they sell to Israel, or they'll just continue to sell to Israel. Israel will need them, and they're starting to realize Israel is going to have to buy from us anyway. I don't know.
Well, what I know, or what you can see because it's apparent, is that this is a humiliation for the hegemon. There was this dynamic before the war started that essentially the United States was the unipower, unilateral power that could throw its weight around and could pursue any course that it wished because it had dominant military and economic power. The Iranians have deflated that balloon. The world sees it. This country, managed to actually withstand everything that Trump could throw at it, shy of nuclear weapons and ground troops.
Yeah,
that's devastating. For the position of the United States. And I think it potentially is dangerous for us because Trump strikes me as the kind of guy who can't abide looking like a loser. I think that it probably drives him to kind of carpet chewing fury, to be perceived that way. And I think he's going off the rails. He the other day said something delusional about how in some states gas is $1.98 a gallon, and it's cheaper than ever. Things that are just transparently, obviously false. It's one thing, we're used to administrations through their PR flex when they talk about abstract academic things like economics. They give a press conference about what's going on in the market. Most people aren't sophisticated enough, and I'm not being like condescending. I'm just saying if you don't have specialized knowledge about a particular field like that, and they barrage you with these stats, you think, well, it seems like it's kind of crappy, but maybe they know better than I do.
Yeah.
When you go up to the pump and it says $4.50 a gallon, you don't have to be particularly bright or insightful to grasp that the cost to fill your vehicle up is now roughly twice what it was, but before all of this started.
And it's especially, Eric, I think when you look at that, and then people in their localities might talk to friends who are farmers or, just trying to go out for dinner, and they start to see, oh, this is starting to affect all the other prices. And then, of course, you hear about other things, that this market from the Persian Gulf, from the Red Sea, these are things that supply all sorts of stuff for chip making and fertilizer and all these things we've been discussing here. I think the average person also starts to take those second and third steps to say, oh, now wait a minute, all these things are going to start to really get slammed here.
Mm-hmm. And what I would like to see percolate and become more common knowledge is that, you remember during Trump's first term when we were told that America is now energy independent, that we are on the verge of being a net exporter of oil. We have enough oil here in the country to provide for ourselves. And that's true.
Yeah.
So why are we paying $4.50 average for gas? Well, the answer is Trump is taking our oil and exporting it to try to desperately shore up the world markets,
right,
so that the whole thing doesn't collapse and blow up in his face. It's going to anyway, I think.
Yeah, and if he doesn't put export controls on things, this is a worldwide commodity. So very clearly, the bidders are going to bid up any worldwide commodity. It's not like this is some pool with a concrete separator. There's nothing between it. It's just fluid all around the world, and so Absolutely. It goes where people want it to go based on the highest bidder. It's and again, I've mentioned this a few times, but it's probably worth mentioning it again. They come up with these different, very, very transparently flaccid attempts to try to shore up and buttress something. So, for example, a few months ago, they said, the Trump administration announces a new refinery. And as I mentioned, that refinery was set up by the Biden administration, and it won't be online until 2027. There haven't been any new refineries in decades. All they've been done is expanded a few other refineries. So that, and what you say that I think is really key, Eric, is the average person who's trying to get to work, trying to do things with their families, and handles a certain set number of things within their immediate attention span or attention scope, and doesn't want to devote all this other attention to the nonsense that they want to hear, wants to be as efficient as possible, is now recognizing that when Kevin Hassett and Scott Bessent and Stephen Miller get up there, and especially Hassett with that Cheshire Cat grin, says, well, yeah, people are spending more now because they're really confident in the economy. They're putting more on their credit cards because they love the economy. It's like, no, dude. And just that stark difference between what they know is going on in their own lives, the decisions they're having to make, and what Hassett is saying, because these people aren't alone. They're talking to their neighbors, and Hassett is alone. Yeah. He's part of this little core group spinning around in the middle of the axis, and all the rest of us are flying around saying, whoa, I want to get off this Turkish twist. Let me out of here. Yeah. I mean, the disconnect between the concerns of average Americans and these people that control the machinery of government. Now, the gulf is so wide. People often talk about the example of the French Revolution and King Louis and Marie Antoinette. And Marie Antoinette, I regard her as a kind of sympathetic figure because, after all, she was just a courtier, just a woman who was brought into the court life and really had no awareness of what life was like outside of Versailles. So that famous comment that she made that everybody has heard about, let them eat cake, I think it was not meant maliciously. From her point of view, oh, there's lots of cake in Versailles. Look, there are tables full of it here. If the peasants are having trouble finding bread, surely they can eat cake. She ended up losing her head for that, because you can imagine how that was received by starving people out in the countryside. We've got a similar situation going on right now where you've got a billionaire telling people he's not much bothered about the economic consequences of his policies. It's outrageous. People are literally being bankrupted by this. And probably it's going to get vastly worse, over the remainder of the summer and into the fall, because this is sort of a lag time effect thing. It's not something that hits suddenly. And they have put artifices in place, like, pumping out the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to try to tamp down what would otherwise have happened much more rapidly and in a more extreme way. But the reserves are depleting. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And as you say, it's a world commodity, and there's lots of stuff that we do have to get from elsewhere, that's produced elsewhere, that's petroleum dependent, that relates to things like food production and so on. And it's going to be horrendous.
Right.
And this guy doesn't seem to grasp it. And I think part of the reason he doesn't grasp it is because he's an ignoramus and he's malicious. And frankly, at the end of the day, he doesn't have to. This is, I think, one of the great problems that we face in this country politically. How does, even with the best of intentions, a guy like Trump, who's a billionaire, and who has his every need catered to, he flies around in a custom 747.
Yeah.
I mean, he's got chefs cooking his food. For him, life is wonderful. He doesn't have any pedestrian concerns like, oh my God, look at the utility bill. How are we going to cover that?
And I know our guest is Eric Peters, everybody, ericpetersautos.com, apostate27832 on X, at apostate27832. And Eric, I know you've mentioned this in your pieces over at the site, and this is just the start of a skyrocketing exponential upward curve on the price slope for everything. And
I hope all the things that I have read are wrong, but the things that I have read are frightening. They're talking about, gas stations, some of them having to shut down because they're simply not going to have any gas. Rationing, forced rationing by the government coming, as the supplies begin to dwindle. And then when we feel the effects in terms of what food availability and food cost, which is highly dependent on diesel fuel and other petroleum products, it is going to be a disaster unlike anything that we've seen. It will make COVID look like it was not, just a minor blip on the radar, potentially.
And of course, I think imaginative, maybe not even conspiracy-minded people, just imaginative, forward-thinking people looking at previous experiences during the lockdown phases might think, well, the way they'll probably try to handle that will be to give everybody an opportunity to get an app on their phone so that they can get in line digitally, so that they can get the call to get their gas, and that will lock them in for the government gas or food or chocolate rationing. And don't forget, as Orwell said, and we all know that in the Ministry of Truth, there's only truth. Those chocolate rations have been oh, no, that's right. They weren't expanded at the opening of 1984. And Winston Smith recognized it, and we know what happened to Winston Smith.
Yes, in his internal monologue. I think, people are talking a lot about these data centers that are suddenly popping up all over the place. What is that all about? I think it's related to what we're talking about. I don't believe it's simply that, data is the commodity of the, of the new era that we're living in. Sure, it is partially. They monetize our data, but it's also something much, much more sinister, I think. I think it is the mechanism via which they intend to exert control over everybody in a situation of crisis. They want to be able to know every last detail about you so that they can then control every last detail about you.
I agree. Everything from Whitney Webb's commentary about this years ago, half a decade ago, looking at organizations like Palantir and some of the work of Elon Musk and so on, going into the digital realm. And then the Trump administration connecting with these people. We've got the ZAs in Honduras and their political influence in Florida, and the rise of Rubio and the GOP down there, connected, of course, with Israel, very big in Florida. And let me fold in, Eric, the commentary from Marco Rubio about the Iranian situation. And I want to get your thoughts on what we heard from Larry Johnson and Pepe Escobar about Iran possibly getting a nuke. We'll talk about the nuke. Yeah. So we'll talk about the nuke capacity in just a minute, but I want to just go back first to what I was just discussing before you joined me. And I want to get your thoughts on this, because my commentary obviously already out there, but I want to give you the opportunity to talk about this blowhard and his utter lies. So I'm going to go back a little bit in the video to Daniel McAdams and play this, and I want to get your thoughts on this. Okay, here we go.
The U.S. war on Iran. If we can, let's listen to this. Let's listen in here.
Let me first bifurcate two things. The only reason there's a blockade, the only reason why there's a U.S. blockade is because Iran has closed they're firing on commercial ships, and they've mined large segments of Hormuz international waters. And so the blockade is only against Iranian ships. And it's very simple. The notion is if no one's ships are going to get out, then Iran's ships aren't going to get out either. We can't live in a world in which they get to close the straits and tell everybody, pay us a toll or we'll blow you up, but their ships get to go out unfettered. So that's the reason why there's a blockade. there wouldn't have been a blockade if Iran had agreed to do what they said they would do when the ceasefire kicked in, which is they were going to open the straits. So let me just focus on the straits for a moment. Number one, what they're doing is unlawful and illegal. There isn't a country on earth other than Iran, maybe Oman that flirted with it, who's in favor of what Iran is doing in the straits. The Chinese are against it. The Russians are against it. Everyone is against it.
What Iran is doing by closing the strait, which they haven't done, by the way, they just said you have to pay a fee. What they have done is unlawful and illegal, says Marco Rubio. I just wonder, how unlawful is it to launch a sneak attack against a foreign country and assassinate its entire leadership? The idea that Marco Rubio will sit up there and condemn how unlawful it is for Iran to close a strait that is within its own territorial waters, when you launched a sneak attack and killed its leadership.
Awesome stuff, Eric. Am I incorrect in thinking that only a few members of Congress have even hinted at the things that Daniel McAdams just said in 25 seconds?
Yeah, sure, because it's dangerous for them to do that, obviously. And, what he touched on bears upon another aspect of hypocrisy. They're all up in arms about the possibility that Iran might have the means to produce a nuclear weapon, or might actually have a nuclear weapon. At the same time, the policy of the United States government is to not even concede that Israel possesses nuclear weapons. Estimates are that they possess about 300 of them in violation of international law. We're not supposed to even. They literally will not even acknowledge this, and it is considered to be a self-evident, not known thing that they have these weapons. I mean, it's the chutzpah of it. That's the right word in this context too. Is really something.
Yeah, I've seen people trying to catch the attention of some of the Congress members down there in the tunnel between the Congressional House and the Rayburn Building and so on, that they can walk underneath the streets. And they just march as quickly as they can. I mean, they should be in Olympic walking competitions, because they'll ask them, does Israel have nuclear weapons? Does Israel, if Israel has nuclear weapons, is shown to have nuclear weapons, will you vote to stop funding and aid based on American statute? And they just keep walking along. They won't acknowledge. Everybody knows that they've got the nuclear weapons, of course. And so what do you think of this report about Iran possibly working with the Pakistanis and the Chinese to maybe do a test out in the desert if the attacks on Lebanon, particularly Beirut, continue from the Israeli side? What do you think? Do you think it's bluster, or do you think that this is the way that Iran is going to be going? And if they do get one nuclear weapon, does that make things more dangerous in the region or less dangerous in the region?
Well, it's completely understandable. Let's start there. That they would seek to get the trump card, the thing that might actually stop this stupid war, ironically enough, for the same reason that you don't see us attempting to change the regime in North Korea, because it's understood the cost would be too high, because the North Koreans possess the ability to realistically and meaningfully fight back in a way that nobody wants.
Right.
Now, would it be dangerous? Ordinarily, I don't think so. Ordinarily, I wouldn't be too concerned about it, but I am, because I think you're dealing with outright fanatics in the state of Israel at this point, and a lot of people in this government as well that are in lockstep with these people, who are apocalyptically minded and who would not abide the Iranians having a deterrent capability, and who might, because they perceive that that's a possibility, go ahead and preemptively launch a nuclear strike against Iran. I see that as a distinct possibility. And of course, it would be catastrophic, horrific on a human level, and horrific also in every other way imaginable as well.
And of course, Netanyahu doesn't mind escalation in any of the many fronts that where they're killing people, whether it be in Gaza or whether it be in the West Bank or in Lebanon or against Iran, because it keeps him out of prison.
Yeah, I mean, consider that this man and his government, by their own admission, have acknowledged that they have killed, 100,000 people, counting right now, in Gaza, 100,000 people. And the total number of casualties, as I understand it, is about 250,000. So consider what the mentality is behind that, what they're capable of. If they're willing to do that, what else are they willing to do? And I think they're willing to do essentially anything. The Iranians, I don't think that they really have a choice. If they don't get a nuclear deterrent, at the end of the day, they're going to be attacked by the United States, by Israel, and it will not end. So what's their option? They have to have some ability to fight back. I just hope that saner heads prevail if it turns out that the Iranians do have that capability, and it shuts this whole thing down. There's something so like psychotically delusional about a nuclear proliferator, Israel, lecturing a country like Iran about how it's not allowed to have a nuclear weapon.
It's amazing. What do you think, to steal that Jeffrey Pyatt terminology, what do you think of the random electron of Turkey there in that mix?
Well, from what I've read about it, Israel has its eyes on Turkey as the next target. And the Turks aren't dumb. At some point you understand you're not dealing with reasonable people who have reasonable concerns. You can make a deal with a reasonable person. You can come to an accommodation, but it's become quite apparent that this greater Israel project is a zero-sum game. They want to have this greater Reich at the end of the day. It's an appropriate term. And they're willing to steamroller over anybody who gets in their way. They want to be a regional hegemon and then potentially a bigger hegemon than that. It's out of control, and it has to be stopped. And they're desperately trying to frame this as, you're somebody who doesn't like Jewish people, if you dare to talk about this. And it's got nothing to do with that. It's got everything to do with this psychotic agenda of people like Netanyahu, who are superficially Jewish, I guess.
Yeah, right.
It's not like he's like an Orthodox practicing Jewish guy. He's a completely secular guy who's like draped himself with this cloth. Look at me. I'm just a poor, humble Jewish guy, and they're out to get me. It's incredible. With
the weird occultic star and all those things. And it's a nation state that whether it be with the blast on the King David Hotel, or it's the Stern Gang, or whatever it is, the whole thing started with aggression and acts of terror. So which is the terror state? The occupation, corralling, genocidal, terroristic state that through the only way it has expanded and the only way it exists is through kinetic aggression against other people and threats of aggression.
Collateral damage. I think it bears repeating what occurred, what was only about a year or so ago, whenever it was, that they en masse triggered the explosives that they had secreted into people's pagers. And it wasn't just the targets that they eliminated. It was anybody who happened to be in the vicinity of the target. And they knew that. They didn't care that there might have been a kid standing next to the guy, that they wanted to get. They ended up mauling and killing God knows how many people. And they were perfectly willing to do that because to them, it's all about, if you're going to make an omelet, you got to break some eggs.
Do you think, Eric Peters is our guest, everyone, of ericpetersautos.com. Eric, do you think that when a person like John Fetterman or Donald Trump receives a gift of the silver-plated pager or the gold-plated pager, do you think that the response from Fetterman, which is that this is, one of the most amazing gifts he's ever received, is just incredible. Do you think that is sincere? And if so, how can he be so disconnected from the harm that has done? How can he be more connected with what he thinks is the greater good, that these innocent children with their hands blown off are not in his mindset? Or do you think that he does feel something? And again, this is just speculation, just merely to present the fact again that he said this and that it's so ridiculous a thing to say in the face of the utter unethical and immoral acts of grievous attacks by the Israelis? Or do you think that Fetterman actually doesn't understand what those things did to people? I mean, he clearly has to have known that they were detonated inside Lebanon. He has to have known. What does he think? It was constructive and helped kids?
I'm not a psychiatrist, so I'm not really somebody who has the expertise to diagnose this, but I think it's evident that it's some form of mental illness, some form of cognitive impairment, when you can't see what is literally recognized that this is not a good thing, but somehow everything has become so politicized and so ideological that's what matters now, not whether something is right, wrong, good or evil. It's whether it's in conformity with whatever the orthodoxy is. So the orthodoxy right now is that Israel good. You can see the pigs in Orwell's Animal Farm. Yes, this is saying that over and over. and everybody else bad. Everybody else
good, two legs better, right?
Yeah. So it's one of the great orthodoxies of our time, at least among the establishment people, is that you cannot, for a moment, in any way, shape, or fashion, question anything that the state of Israel does. Everything Israel does is justifiable and good, and in congruence with, of all things, Christian values. And Israel's interests are America's interests. It's a dogma. And it's a dogma that's been instilled in people for a very long time. And so to go back to answer your question, I do think there are some people who genuinely believe it, meaning that, they're not necessarily evil in their hearts. They think that, that their position is the correct one. Just as I'm sure back, during the days of the German Reich, I'm sure there were lots of ordinary Germans who thought that they were on the side of the angels. We're doing the right thing, the necessary thing. Dealing with these Untermenschen over there, we're fighting for civilization.
I think it reminds me of Mike Huckabee and that perverse mindset of people who, if Netanyahu were to hand them poison-laced drinks, and I won't say the name of the product because it got slammed, because of the cult that drank that stuff. Poison-laced drinks, they'd gulp that stuff down, no problem, if it said that it would bring about the greater Israel. This is the great fulfillment. I want to get your thoughts also, Eric, about the NDAA Section 224.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
It's coming a cropper, right? Everything that a lot of people were saying on the fringe and conspiracy, and for a while it was there was an aspect to it that was kind of funny, like what you were talking about with reporters, tracking down the hurriedly walking congressman, trying to get him to respond to a question. But it's getting really serious. I wanted to mention this because it relates to this. Do you know Cenk Uygur from the Young Turks?
Absolutely. And yes, absolutely. Yeah. The British aspect of this.
Yeah. So this guy's, he's a pretty well-known personality. He's got a show, The Young Turks. I mean, he's not a radical guy. He's of the left. He's kind of a progressive left guy. But anyway, he was going to travel to Britain, and he was told that he was not permitted to enter Britain. And the reason why? It wasn't because the British government had a problem with him per se. It was because the Israeli government told the British government that they had a problem with him for things that he had said that they didn't like. And so the British government, acting at the behest of the Israeli government, barred Cenk from entering the United Kingdom.
Unbelievable. It's crazy. In fact, I've got a little something in the news notes just to bring up a little bit about the media. And we talked a little bit about this yesterday. And I also mentioned how hypocritical it was that the Europeans, all of a sudden, Eric, over Sunday night into Monday morning, the Europeans, of course, being that far ahead of us, issued a request, a protest to Israel to stop their attacks on Lebanon. They were protesting the attacks on Lebanon. In the meantime, I did some checking into all of the businesses that are in these countries, Germany, France, England, all of these things that sell weapons either through the government or through corporate ties to the government to Israel. And I've got the second part of that report coming up. And many of these countries are supposedly on the Board of Peace. That during a time when the Board of Peace has gotten no money and Israel has continued to blast people inside Gaza. And these people have the gall to be talking about this, you should stop what you're doing in Lebanon. And yet, when a guy like Cenk Uygur is going to be going over to speak, they want to silence him. They want to use the force of government to say, we will arrest you if you speak up because you've spoken up. It's just the hypocrisy is stunning. Let me get your thoughts on this NDAA Section 224 and go into the media stuff perhaps later. But I just noted here the full House Armed Services Committee markup of the NDAA is scheduled for Thursday, the 4th. Amendments will be considered then. It's then that Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie plan to see it purged. As we mentioned yesterday, Section 224 will plunk down U.S.-Israeli connected projects in numerous states, creating perpetual motion machines of pork and graft that will be very difficult to end. And I likened it, Eric, to how difficult it has been every time they have one of these base closure committee hearings, and there's some base in a state that they're getting ready to close. And they were going to be, they tried to do this with the so-called peace dividend during the H.W. Bush administration, and Obama was trying to do the same thing. Every state where they tried to close a base, a naval base, an Air Force base, an Army base, anything like that, no, you can't do that. They're jobs. It's jobs. And that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to sink the claws of Israeli-connected corporations into these states. I'd love to get your thoughts on Section 224. And up on the screen, I'll put for everybody the phone number if people want to call for Thursday. It's 202-224-3121 to get to the House switchboard.
Well, it's making something overt that's been implicit for a long time. Many people do not know that a lot of American police departments send their people over to Israel to be trained and have learned tactics from the IDF. It's not an accident. It's not coincidental that American cops now treat American citizens as if they were peons and they were an occupying army, yelling at them to get on the ground now, right. over traffic tickets, at gunpoint, the dominance techniques. So again, this is not a new thing. All it is an elaboration of something that's been going on for a very long time, and which has been sought, and we're literally, I don't think it's too extreme to say this, we become an occupied country. A foreign country effectively has operative control over not just the federal government, but state governments as well. They are criminalizing in some areas, or want to criminalize free expressions of criticism that they don't like. You're not allowed to, as a private person, you're not allowed to boycott. You're not allowed to decline to spend your money, in a certain way, because that affronts the state of Israel, and you'll become persona non grata. How long will it be? I don't think very long before we in this country have to deal with what they're already dealing with in the UK and other European countries, where, you post something mean that they don't like on Facebook or other social media, and there's a knock at the door, and you've got these body armored thugs there for the wrong thing that you've just committed about something. They're playing for all the marbles. This is a real thing. It's very serious.
Yeah, it's the same perverse mentality that I saw when I was in Heathrow, and a man sat down next to me, and I've mentioned the story before, Eric, but I'll bring it up again. At that time, they were pushing for Obamacare, and this man sat next to me. He had his passport, and inside his passport, he had a U.S. Constitution. I said, "Oh, you see the U.S. Constitution," and I could tell from his accent that he didn't originally come from the United States. I said, "Oh, were you a naturalized citizen?" He said, "Yeah." And I said, "You guys have to take a test. I wish the Congress people would have to take your test." And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "For example, you get Obamacare." And he goes, "Oh, I think that is important. That's important to pass." And I was like, "Really?" So I went through some of the constitutional reasons why it's unconstitutional, all these different things. Then I mentioned how, forcing insurance companies to accept people with pre-existing conditions inspires younger people to not get insurance. That's what drove a lot of this, because they intentionally did this in various states. And I said, and what's going to happen is rates are just going to go up and up and up. And finally I said, man, I can tell that, I'm not convincing you. So let me just ask you just a fundamental ethical question. Let's say this is you've got this great idea. You want this to pass. This is a new idea. It doesn't exist now. And he said, "Well, we already have." I said, "Would you leave me alone?" And he said, "Well, we already have things like the draft. You have to do that." And I was like, "No. I just want to be left alone. I don't want to have to buy this. If you think it's a good idea, will you just go in on this? Will you leave me alone?" And he said, no, I would not leave you alone. And then he said, you are righteous about this. You are religious about this. Leave me alone. He literally just said, "I won't leave you alone," and then told me to leave him alone.
Yeah.
And I said, did you hear what you just said? He said, "What?" I was like, "We're just exchanging sound waves through the air. You sat next to me, and we're having a conversation about something you literally want to do to me to make me behave in a certain way. And you're telling me to leave you alone. And it's the same mindset we're seeing here. This is their national security insurance. You have to buy into it. You are part of it. And if you're not part of it, you're the problem.
Sure.
They will define what is in your best health. They will define what is in your national security interest. And if you don't conform, you're the danger. You're the one who's the one who's stopping the progress of the state.
Yeah, they're so concerned about your health and your security that they'll ultimately kill you for it if you if you decline to participate.
Yeah,
it's an irony that's lost on them. But there's this sort of like implicit militancy, this just sort of casual coercion that most people don't question. It's weird, isn't it? Like, this just authoritarianism is totally cool. It's the way we should be.
It's the greater good, right?
Yeah. And there's also this, I think that part of it arises from an absence of humility, frankly. I know I'm barely able to like competently handle my own affairs. I do my best, but I make mistakes, and I know that I'm not omniscient and I don't always have the right answer. And I'm just talking about my own personal life, my own personal business, and all those kinds of things. I would never in a million years presume to think that I'm wise enough and smart enough and knowledgeable enough to tell you or anybody else what you need to do. Yeah. I'm gonna make decisions for you, notwithstanding that I have no idea really what your situation is. The factors that you're dealing with. The arrogance of it is stupendous. These people, and it's even worse, like you and I know each other. Imagine like you're making decisions for people you've never even met. They're just sort of cardboard cutouts, widgets, things.
Right,
and
exactly.
You're playing with their lives, but you're indifferent to the fact that you're doing that. I think it really is a kind of derangement.
It is. And I thank you so much for, again, occasionally when you're, how it is when you're on your own and you get these feelings, you're thinking about these things. He's just like, I know that a lot of other people feel the same way, but you articulate it so well. I want to go over to the Rumble chat, Eric, and get some questions. And then I want to talk to you about this piece that you wrote about medical marijuana, which I think is really, really important. But over at Rumble, we've got Yona's in the house. We've got lots of great guard. Ask Eric, says Birdhouse Blues, if he knows about the recent junkyard fires. Over a dozen blazes across multiple states, accidents, or the government wiping out old parts so you can't repair your own car.
I've not heard about that. I don't know anything about that. I'll look into it.
It's a twist on when they had hydroxychloroquine plants throughout Africa. They were the precursors to hydroxychloroquine, which is, of course, just a quinine derivative. There were like 4 or 5 of those plants that all of a sudden, just within a few months, I don't know, it must be something about the manufacturer. They just, every few months, they just have to explode. Right. I don't know how it works. And then same thing with the cash for clunkers nonsense. Got to get rid of those old cars. Wouldn't want anybody to, got to buy those new cars. Got to buy them. Absolutely. Let's see. Final one more here. Let's see. And by the way, everybody, give us your information on the price of gasoline. Yona's mentioning the Ergun, the Stern Gang. Absolutely. And just absolutely vile. And to think that they would then embrace a state that's based on that sort of violence. Quinine eye for the sick guy, says Yona. Hey, by the way, I got to mention my nephew Cord. My nephew Cord was one of the people they went to on Queer Eye for the Straight Guy. Yeah, and they went to his place in Brooklyn and like gave him a makeover thing or whatever, and like broke into his place. It was just absolutely crazy. I guess I don't know, what was that, on MTV or something? I don't know how that works.
I know the show. I didn't really watch it that much.
I didn't see it, but so let me head over and check this out, Eric. Give us some thoughts on this. This is a very interesting piece. Yeah. The medical marijuana grift. Mm-hmm. Important, I think, especially as people start to think about doing things themselves and breaking away from big pharma. Tell us about this article.
Well, it's not in all states, but it's in my state, Virginia, and a number of other states where they have legalized pot to a degree, but they go through this ridiculous patty cake kabuki theater thing of making it medical marijuana, implying that it's like you're some kind of a patient and you can only get it at a state sanctioned dispensary and you have to get a prescription. Literally, you have to call up some doctor, go through this ridiculous, like Dr. Smith from Lost in Space. Oh, the pain.
I can't believe you. I was literally going to mention do a Dr. Smith impression earlier. You nailed it, dude. William, my boy.
And it's suffering to me. It gets my back up because it's a degradation, and it's not just a degradation of us. It's also another way that they have degraded what used to be an honorable profession, medicine. The doctors know, and as if there's anything wrong with it. So what? Sometimes I have trouble sleeping. Sometimes I just want to mellow out. I freely confess that I occasionally smoke pot. I occasionally have a gummy. So what?
Yeah.
A lot of people have a glass of whiskey. There's no moral issue with that as far as I'm concerned. And this just idea that we as grown men and women, as adults for crying out loud, have to beg and plead, oh, please, sir, may I have, and get permission to be allowed to do these things and then have to jump through these various hoops and pay money, to get some stupid piece of paper that says, now we're allowed to do it. It is corrupting. It is, it is, and it's metastasizing. The thing that worries me a lot is they're going to take this and expand it to include things like supplements, vitamins. They're going to say, oh, people shouldn't be allowed to have unsupervised access to homeopathic products.
Yes, right.
We need to have experts, because that's how it is already in the medical profession. If you wanted to get antibiotics or any other commonly available thing that you can get, by the way, in Mexico and in other countries, you go to the pharmacy, talk to the pharmacist. You don't have to go through a stupid doctor and pay through the nose for an appointment and all of that. You just discuss this with the pharmacist and you get get what you need. We're not allowed to do that because we're children. We're idiot children, and we have to be parented. And they're going to do the same thing. There have been calls for this to regulate and to limit access to supplements, to vitamins, to things like that people used to treat themselves. During COVID, people took readily available remedies that were far more effective than the stuff that they were trying to push down people's throats. They don't like that. They don't want anything that is A, under our control, and B, inexpensive. They don't want those two things. They want things to be expensive and under their control.
And they hide behind this facade of the collective wisdom, right, Eric? It's well, you as an individual, you're vulnerable. You might make the wrong decision. So logically, what we're going to do is we're going to take a bunch of individuals who also are vulnerable like you, who are making decisions not about their own bodies, but about other people's bodies. We'll call them the experts, even though you could turn to people and actually fund experts that you think are reliable. No. These people will steal your opportunity to do that. They'll block competition. They'll take away opportunities for you to compare to other people and the decisions that they made on what was safe, what was useful, and so on. And these people will represent the collective wisdom rather than the marketplace, where people show their decisions and their mistakes and we learn from them and move on. There will be a core group constantly supported through the coercive mechanism of taxation to fund the magic, as Rousseau would say, wisdom that comes from on high inside the magic government box. Yeah, and of course, there's no chance it'll
moralization and essentially a state of perpetual childhood. People are not allowed to grow up. They're not allowed to evaluate things in life and look at it and think, well, okay, I see the pros and the cons, and either I'll choose it because I think that the pros outweigh the cons, or no, I'm not going to do that because I think the cons outweigh the pros. That's what it means to be a grown-up. People are no longer allowed to be grown-ups. They have to be parented constantly, and it's insufferable if you're somebody who doesn't like to be treated like a child. There's also, for me personally, this was something that really hardened my attitude toward the state and made me into a vociferous anarchist libertarian. And I mentioned this in my article. In Virginia, when I was 19 years old, I got arrested for growing pot plants in my college dorm. I got arrested and charged with a felony.
Wow. Yeah,
production and manufacture of a controlled substance. And, potentially I could have gone to prison for that. Now it's legal. It's just the arbitrary whim of the state. The state, back when I was in college, it was illegal. Oh, it's a controlled substance. Now the law's changed. If you want to, I can grow pot plants in my yard if I feel like it. You're allowed under Virginia law now to grow up to 4 plants per person.
Oh, that's so kind of them.
And of course, I wanted to mention though, at the time I was fortunate in that, for me, it ended up being reduced to a misdemeanor, nothing charge and went away. Right. But I was very well aware that there were a whole lot of other people who were similarly situated who'd gotten arrested for the same kind of nonsense who actually did go to prison. And that has bothered me immensely ever since that time. The idea that, a person's life could be destroyed over something as idiotic as that.
Exactly. A felony conviction like that. Try to get a job when you've got a felony conviction like that, especially at that time period. Nancy Reagan, just say no, and all that other insanity.
You and I would not be talking, because at that time there's no way I would have gotten a job at the Washington Times as an editorial writer with a felony conviction. Not to mention potentially if I would have been in prison anyway for who knows how many years, and I never would have been able to get my start in journalism and get to where I am now. It would have wrecked my life completely. And luckily for me, I managed to not have my life wrecked, but literally millions of people for the past God only knows how many decades have had their lives destroyed over this crap. And it infuriates me, and I have zero tolerance for it.
Oh, it's very frustrating too, because as you know, with the long COVID stuff that I've been dealing with, I spend a couple $100 a month at least on supplements and all these different types of things. And it's only been through word of mouth and the market mechanism that I've been able to research, find information, check to see whether or not that information is being promoted recklessly by some special group that can get, a benefit from it. And yet so many people fall in line behind what the FDA says. That's not FDA approved. And they're talking about this. They're debating whether RFK Jr. is going to do this or do that. I understand that there are positives to RFK Jr. maybe opening things up or changing things on the schedule for children's vaccines or whatever. But to not take the next step to say, none of that sort of talk amongst the government should be happening in the first place. None of it should be subsidized by the government. It should all be based on consumers, torts, and the market. And that's all. And market incentives.
And on a human level, between human beings, I think I've mentioned before, I came from a family of doctors. My father and grandfather were doctors. And I remember growing up in that environment. My grandfather had a practice on the first level of their brownstone in Allentown, Pennsylvania. He was an allergist. It was him and his nurse / receptionist. And you interacted with him. There wasn't, an HMO. It wasn't this conveyor belt that they have now. And it was inexpensive, and it was human. His patients knew him by name; they knew each other, and they could call him, and he would talk to them. It was human. Now it's become corporatized. It's become a horrific machine that's all about extracting as much money as possible from as many people as possible. Not about helping people; it's about monetizing people.
All the prescription, always the prescription. It's. Hold on a second. We've got, we've got some comments. I'm going to go back, Eric. Smoove has this, and I'm going to put this up there. I don't know anything about this. He says, I heard, and this is a little late. Sorry, Smoove. He says, I heard that a group of Iranian hackers are working to destroy the system of consumer credit. And he also says they would be greeted as liberators.
Yeah. You remember Fight Club, the end scene?
Yeah. Yes. Oh man, classic stuff. A buddy of mine who edits a series of books, my friend Michael, has become pretty good friends with Chuck Palahniuk and or Palahniuk or whatever, and he's co-edited some books with him, and says he's a really decent dude. Eric, let me just ask you one more quick one over at Eric Peters Autos, and get your thoughts on this. Hit me with the one that you'd like me to point out right off the bat. We got Eureka, the Nissan story, #1 attraction, and the war goes on. Yes, indeed. What do you think?
Let's talk about something positive. The Nissan story I thought was worth writing about, which is why I did it. As you and I have talked about, and people who maybe follow me on EP Autos know, I constantly bemoan the way cars are just becoming appliances, uninteresting appliances. And a facet of that is the disappearing manual transmission. And it's not so much because of the lack of desire for it. It is because the vehicle manufacturers are under this immense pressure to comply with these various regulations, specifically having to do with things like gas mileage and emissions. And the reason why automatics are preferable in that context is because you can program an automatic. You can fine tune it to shift at just the right moment to optimize things like gas mileage and emissions. Now, the difference isn't significant from the point of view of you or me who's driving the car. A manual equipped car, maybe it's going to get, a mile or 2 or 3 less per gallon. And maybe its emissions are going to be fractionally higher under certain conditions. So it doesn't matter to us, but it matters greatly to the vehicle manufacturers. So that's why manual transmissions are disappearing. Volkswagen just announced that the last vehicle that they sell, the Jetta, that is available with a manual transmission, will become automatic only, beginning with the 2027 model year. So after the end of this year, you will no longer be able to get any Volkswagen vehicle that isn't an automatic. And there are other manufacturers that are in the same position. So circling back to Nissan, bless Nissan, they continue to offer a manual transmission as standard in the 370Z, the Z sports car. A lot of times you can get a manual, but only in the higher trims. Like for example, the Toyota Tacoma pickup. Trucks used to come standard with manuals. That's why standard was synonymous with manual at one point. Now, the only one that they sell that even has a manual is the loaded up top of the line TRD for four-wheel drive, off-road, blah, 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 that costs $50,000. And again,
I hate automatics too.
Paradoxically, they don't want to sell too many of the manuals because it hurts them from a regulatory point of view. But Nissan's holding the line. Not only are they continuing to produce the manual, but they have actually reversed course on one thing. This year, 2026, the top performance model of the Z is called the Nismo. And it has a slightly more powerful version of the twin turbo V6, and it gets a bunch of other upgrades. It was automatic. It is automatic only right now. They're making the manual available for 2027.
Is that the one you mentioned is over 400 horsepower?
I think it's 420. Yeah, the Nismo. Yeah, which is probably more than twice what the original 71 240Z had. I think the original 240Z had something like, if my memory's right, about 150 horsepower.
Wow, that's amazing. They've come a long way from the days when I just knew them as Datsun. You know, there was Datsun and Nissan. We are driven from Datsun.
Nobody demands more from Datsun.
Yeah, absolutely. And they were sort of the black sheep of Japanese cars. Toyota was way ahead of the Datsun, and then you had Honda. But the Nissans, that is really, really cool.
Yeah, the thing I wanted to mention is that the car starts at around $40,000.
Really?
Now, that's inexpensive today. To give you a point of reference, the Corvette, which is automatic only, starts at $70,000. Wow. So $40,000. Yeah, still it's not an inexpensive car, but it's still something that regular, ordinary people like you and me, regular people potentially could buy this car. Whereas the Corvette has become effectively a hypercar, an exotic. Nobody, people who can afford to spend $70,000 on a car, they're in a different league than us. So I'm just happy to see Nissan holding fast to this.
Well, I that's really, really neat. And as you know, I'm not in that market, but boy, just to go on a test drive of one of those would be so much fun.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting one. Hopefully this fall, because this is the 27 models should be coming out in a couple of months.
I love the look of it. It's gorgeous. Yeah. Wow. It's sort of like the tail sort of reminds me of the structural end of a Mustang a little bit. And then it's got the front of the recent Hondas, and then the front glass up to the roof is almost like a Porsche.
Yeah.
Wow, that is.
Have you noticed like the rear quarter window here? That's very much echoes the original line of the first 71 240Z.
Yeah. Wow, that's so nice. Gee whiz. Well, you brought my spirits up. This reminds me of that night we were watching the chase scene from the 7-Ups. You knew how to lift my spirits. That's awesome, Mary. So my birthday tomorrow. So that'll be
awesome. I did not know that.
Yeah, thanks, man. Yeah, we're gonna have a good time, and I have to. I'm going over to the Moscow studios from Moscow here over to the Studio B to take care of the Lynx hybrids over there. So I'll be celebrating the birthday over there. But we're doing
Do
our
you have
summer
access
drive.
to Lynx hybrids?
Yes, yes. My brothers, they're two stray animals, and one arrived, and it was an amazing thing, Eric. What happened was my brother and his wife bring in strays. They take care of cats. She loves cats, and he's great with cats. And when they're gone, they ask me to stop by and be really close to the cats, feed them, and so on. And I really am devoted to take care of the cats. Like I literally, if the cats aren't inside, I don't leave the house. I'm there. I'm always there for the cats. And so they had three other cats a number of years ago, maybe 8 years ago. And I had brought them in at twilight because they're sort of in the countryside. And, the foxes, bears, coyotes might come out, bobcats, whatever. And so I brought them in and in the back, and out of the twilight came this big cat that, in the smudginess of the twilight, I was like, what is that thing? And I was up, it's a little concrete riser, maybe 3.5, 4 inches off the ground with bricks and some grass and bushes, and then a stone wall that runs perpendicular to the house off into the distance in woods. And so I'm looking at this thing coming towards me. I'm like, should I be afraid of this thing? What is this? Now the cats are fine inside. They're safe. There are other strays. They're fine. But this cat's coming over to me and he's big. And I'm like, what the heck? So I put my hand out and he came up to my knees. He brushed against my hand and he smelled of musk. And I'm like, whoa, this is something I've never seen before. It's not a bobcat. I don't know what this is. So I went in and I emailed my brother and I said, hey, I know that, for strays, you two often will leave some water around to sort of get them acclimated. Then you bring them inside and you're really good with taking care of strays. I don't know what this thing is. Do you want me to leave some water out, or do you think that'd be too dangerous? Because the other cats might, in the daytime, he might come around. He said, oh, no, it's fine. He emailed me back almost immediately. He's like, oh, no, it's fine. Feel free to bring him inside. We're calling him Leo. We're trying to get him used to the house. So I emailed him back and I was like, hey, just to let you know, I think we're talking about the same cat. This cat's immense. And not only could he kill any of these other cats, he could kill a small child, like instantly kill a kid. And so he's like, no, it's fine. It's fine. So I let the cat in and he sort of walked around quietly. The other cats weren't anywhere around. And he went up. The first thing he did was he used a litter box. So I knew he had to be domesticated. And I'm like, okay, that's really weird. But he had not been so-called fixed. So I thought, wow, that's really strange. So over the course of time, they brought him in and they did the procedure on him. And then about a year later, 2 other giant cats. And this cat had this sort of upward meow. It was like this, like that. And he didn't purr, which is strange. And I guess lynx, it takes them a while to learn how to purr or to develop a purr. So I went on YouTube because I didn't know what he was. And I'm like, I think he's like a lynx. He has sort of like a lynx sort of look and everything. It turns out there's a channel on YouTube called Lynx Hybrid. And all the cats, when you see them, they cross them with Siamese and tabbies. They cost like over $1,000.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so I was like, wow, geez, that's amazing.
Did these guys get out, or were they the result of mating between a wild lynx and regular cats?
I think they had to have been purchased. I think they were purchased. And my brother and his wife, they contacted people, they put the word around, didn't hear anything from anybody. The cats weren't chipped. But I think that it had to have been that they were domesticated animals. And the other 2 that showed up, both giant cats, even bigger than the first one. And one of them ended up disappearing, but the other is still with them. So they have 2 now. All the other ones have passed away through old age and things, but the 2 lynx hybrids are still there. And they come around once in a while. Like when I'm doing the show, you'll see one get up on the table or whatever, or I'll take the camera and show one running, and they're amazing.
Pictures of these guys?
Hmm?
You have pictures of these guys?
Yeah, I'll send you over some of the pictures. I have
You
some on
gotta
my
send
phone.
me some pictures.
Okay. Yeah. In fact, if you go over to my Facebook feed, I'll show you real quick. If I go to Facebook, I'll show you one of the pictures. There's one that's a really, really cute picture of when I first got to know the cats. This one cat, Leo. When I first got to know Leo, he was lying down and he was putting his paws up against my forehead, like pushing up against my forehead. It was absolutely adorable. But I'll show you right here. Here we go. All right. So this is Leo. That's the one that first appeared. And you can see he's got the striping, everything right there. That's him.
He's a big boy. What does he weigh? Probably about 25.
He originally, before they did the procedure, he must have been over 20 pounds.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was really big. And the other one is still over 20, I think. And just, a great animal, super, super cool. And, you can't go wrong with him. Just an amazing, amazing friend. And he always, when I've been very sick with, headaches and, like vomiting and stuff and in the bathroom, terrible, terrible sickness, he has stayed with me on the floor and lay down. And the reason he did was because there was a time when he was very, very ill with something in his lungs a number of years ago, about 4 years ago, over Christmas break. And in fact, like a couple days before Christmas. And I could tell he had a fever. And so my brother's wife said, well, they were away. She said, well, it's your call. If you think that he really needs to get to him, here's the vet. They're down and just over the border in Massachusetts. Bring him down. But he got to let you know it's Friday night. You have to get him there before noon on Saturday. So I had to come home. I went there the next morning and he was still having a hard time breathing. And I sang to him, brought him with me in the car, sang to him. His name is Leo. So I did, instead of Chico and the man, Chico, don't be discouraged. I said, Leo, don't be discouraged. So I brought him and went into the vets. And they said, it's a good thing you brought him, because if you hadn't brought him today, he'd be dead by Monday. And I was like, wow, that's
too fragile like that, as you know.
Yeah, I had no idea. And ever since then, every time I see him, you can tell. And when I've been sick, he comes over and he gives me back something that is just amazing. It's really
they know that's part of the appeal of cats. I've noticed that. When I'm sick, my cats know, and they commiserate. They come and they hang out and they let you know that they're on your side. It's a cool thing.
It is. It's wild. And it sometimes, because we lose these animals, it makes you think like, boy, I hope I see him again,
Absolutely.
So, okay, Eric, thanks, man. This is awesome. I really appreciate it. And, I'll send you some pictures on the phone, and they'll be rocking shots. And I hear the cats in the background. Give them some pets for me.
I totally will do that. They're saying, "Where's my food? It's time for us."
I'll raise you a glass of some orange soda tomorrow night that I'm going to have in celebration. Awesome. I don't drink or anything, but that'll be my birthday drink, man. Thank you, brother.
Cool. Thanks, amigo.
Got it, man. Talk to you soon.
Okay.
Eric Peters, everybody, a good man. And we're going to take a break, come back after we hear from two good buddies also, from Spock and McCoy, from the Star Trek Liberty Conspiracy Mind Meld.